All right. Let's see. So, could everyone please raise your hand if you have access to banking services? If you have a checking account, savings account, one of those weird direct deposit cards? Okay. Now keep your hand up if you do your banking at a credit union. Okay. Now keep your hand up if you already knew that that meant you were a member owner of a cooperative business. All right. So that's a decent number of you, but there's a lot of people who don't even realize it. There's a slew of people who are members of cooperatives who don't even realize it. So if you'll allow me to start at the beginning, Buffalo has a proud history of industry. For a time, this city was at the forefront of manufacturing in the country, if not the world. We made more steel than any other city. We had a robust and diverse base of products that were made in Buffalo, which included cars, trains, boats, planes, beer, cereal, bicycles, chemicals, clothing, candy, and so on. But the part of that story that wasn't told, however, is the fact that the manufacturing might of Buffalo was never controlled by the people who lived here. Lackawanna Steel, the company that would eventually become Buffalo's flagship of industry, Bethlehem Steel, was intentionally organized from the very beginning so that only 5 to 10% of the investors were actually from the local area. And that's not a particularly unique story. Those businesses that were started by Buffalonians would eventually be bought out by larger national firms. And even the boom years of wartime were nitpickingly micromanaged by the federal government. Additionally, the story of Buffalo's decline as a city is one of repeated decisions made by those in power with no regard for the voices of or the impact on the people living in the communities that they were working in, as urban renewal project after urban renewal project tore down established, vibrant communities. And when you destroy a community, you aren't just relocating people. You're tearing apart the connections between them, dissolving the relationships that come from walking next door to borrow that proverbial cup of sugar, and the concern that makes people watch out for each other. This should sound familiar to people all over the United States, especially in other Rust Belt cities, as the repercussions of legal and financial policies put in place by government and banks have continued to play out, blighting neighborhoods and segregating entire cities. Now, there have been a few glimmers of hope, however. Neighborhoods have been able to stand their ground, and people have banded together to weather out financial depression. These have been the times when people have leaned on each other and worked together from the ground up. To quote Out of the Pit, a book on starting low-income food co-ops, cooperation is timelessly a part of human nature, an impulse that rises whenever a task looms too large for an individual or a powerless group. Hence the phrase, many hands make light work. I've lived at the Nickel City Housing Cooperative for almost 5 years now. It's on the corner of Elmwood and North. It's a 3-story mansion with a lived-in basement I share with 13 other people. And before you ask, we have 4 bathrooms, 3 of them have showers, 1 of those is a bathtub. It's fine. I've cooked a lot of gigantic dinners, and I've been through a lot of meetings. And there's basically 2 reasons I continue to live there. The first is that I have something of a superhero complex. I want to save the world, and for those of you who insist that that's impossible, I'll settle for saving as many people as possible. And I continue to believe that by living in community and bringing democracy directly into the home, we can make the world a better place in very real ways. The other reason I want to live there is that there are these times when it just feels perfect. There are these moments when there are people in the kitchen talking, laughing, singing, dancing, my dog is playing with my housemate's dog, and there are these robust and delectable scents wafting through the air. Time stands still, and it makes all the dirty dishes worth it. It's like the best parts of Thanksgiving dinner, except for that it occurs on a regular basis and without warning. There's the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. It's been actually referenced a number of times tonight. Well, I have the better part of a village living in my house. Now, the cooperative model is a way of formalizing that concept of interdependence. Whereas the common understanding of a cooperative is probably the grocery store with the 30 different varieties of granola, or the house on the corner where the fire spinners eat almost exclusively tofu. What a cooperative truly is any enterprise where the people who have a stake in the game, for example, the consumers of a good or service, or the employees of a business, also have ownership and control over that enterprise. This obviously differs from a sole proprietorship where the boss owns and controls everything, as you can see behind me, or an investor-owned corporation where the employees have no ownership and very few options for any kind of control. You could think of it as kind of a combination of the agency and representation that people are supposed to have in a democratic society, combined with the focus of working in a specific business, sort of a best of both worlds of public and private sector. And co-ops have a hidden history in Buffalo. The first co-op in Buffalo was a grocery store started on the east side by African Americans during the Great Depression. And this is a scan of the Buffalo Rainy Day Sun, a community newspaper that ran for 14 months in Buffalo starting in 1973. The Rainy Day Sun touched on a lot of different radical topics, but it specifically had a section that always covered news pertinent to the co-op community. There's even a conference in Buffalo about cooperatives that the Rainy Day Sun documented. And co-ops are making a comeback in Buffalo. There are already a number of them that are already open, ready for business. Bread Hive, a worker-owned bakery on Buffalo's west side, just hired their first new part-time employee a few weeks ago. Their co-ops are gearing up for expansion. My house, the Nickel City Housing Cooperative, is thinking about expanding into a third building. And there are a slew of people in the formative stages of starting new co-ops. A vertical farm, a weatherization company, a construction company, a student-run tutoring organization, just to name a few. And we as a movement are working together to try and reach out and work on each other's projects by organizing annual mixers or starting a think tank to bolster the movement and each other's projects. It's really, really great because we have these people who have been working in the movement for decades right alongside people who just stumbled down out of the snowstorm because they heard about this weird communal house. I was at the grand opening party for Bread Hive, and there came a point in the night where the person I had carpooled with was ready to go, but I had found myself in the middle of a conversation with one of the people who started the Buffalo Cooperative Federal Credit Union years and years ago. And I had such a look of uncontainable glee on my face that it was apparently impossible for them to pull me out of it. They couldn't bear the thought. So we didn't leave the party for a while after that. And this is important for Buffalo because a company controlled by the workers is probably not going to destroy the community that it came from, and it definitely won't ship its business overseas, putting itself out of work. By comparison, Buffalo's soil is so laden with heavy metals it's dangerous to grow your own vegetables. And you can't eat the fish in the water, which is debilitating for Buffalo's growing refugee population, which for some groups, fish is an important cultural food staple. It's like, give a man a fish, and he can eat for a day. Teach a man to fish, his whole family gets stomach cancer. It's terrible. Additionally, the concept of interdependence, both formally and informally, has been an important but little-known aspect of the struggle of African Americans since the first arrival of slaves in America. It started with things as simple as pooling together what little money they could scrape up to buy each other's freedom one at a time. And it grew into things like starting food cooperatives and worker-owned businesses like the Freedom Quilting Bee in Alabama, which gave them stable income and dignified work. Civil rights activists over the years have written and talked about the importance of cooperatives such as Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Jo Baker, A. Philip Randolph, and many more. And this is important for Buffalo as it's become one of the most segregated cities in the country. For those of you who aren't familiar with this image, this is from a study put on by a couple of professors out of Brown and Florida University. And the different colored dots represent the different colored racial identities identified by people who filled out 2010 census data. As you can see, there's some very clear and distinct lines where the colors do not overlap, and that's not okay. But now, after having done something so serious, something a little bit more lighthearted. The movie Dragonheart came out when I was 6 years old. This was a time when it was still culturally acceptable for me to be as excited about dragons as I am and always will be. Without being told, every member of my family knew for a fact that I wanted to see this movie, and many of them wanted to be the one to take me to go see the movie that was sure to be my favorite movie for years and years to come. However, my excitement was so intense that apparently all of them assumed that I had already been taken or was going to be taken by somebody, to the point that I never actually got to see the movie in theaters. It's like the nerdiest version of the most popular girl in school not having a date to prom cliche. Now, there's a scene in the movie where the character played by Dennis Quaid, Bowen, a knight who's become more obsessed with revenge and money, is reunited with his code of ethics, his code of honor. And there's some good stuff in there. Defend the defenseless, uphold the weak, undo the wicked. That scene's always been really important to me. Again, the hero obsession. And I've wanted a code of honor of my own. Now, the cooperative movement, any cooperative business, has at its core a set of 7 principles called the Rochdale Principles, named after a cooperative group that started in Rochdale, United Kingdom, 1840s. And these principles work together synergistically to create an intentional and conscientious organization, which is really great. But then there's also these really great components that come out of each individual principle, such as open and voluntary membership. It means you can't bar somebody from being a member of a cooperative based on any demographic that they belong to. So cooperatives have an inherent potential as a tool for anti-discrimination and empowerment of traditionally marginalized groups. Or number 5, education, which doesn't necessarily pertain to getting a BA in business, though that would work. It also talks about any kind of non-traditional concepts of education, such as conflict resolution through restorative justice, or consensus-based decision-making, eldership. I can't even think of all the things that I've learned in my time, very brief as it is, in cooperatives. And cooperatives in the past have seen that when they train their own members for leadership roles within the business, those leadership skills readily and often do translate over into the civic and political arena. So in this way, you can see how the model has a potential for building a deeper understanding and engagement with the democratic process, especially when you take in mind how widespread the application for the model is. All over the world, there are examples of cooperatives. Not just grocery and housing, but manufacturing. What kind of manufacturing, you ask? Let's see, we've got doors and windows, textiles, kitchen appliances, beer, bread, coffee, solar panels, there's a bunch more like that. There's cooperatives that do clerical services, funerary, childcare. There's co-op apartment buildings, social services, exotic dancing, bookstores. Buffalo's Talking Leaves bookstore actually used to be, at its inception, worker-owned business. Fun fact. Farming cooperatives, utilities, website hosting, thrift stores, book publishing, a co-op record label. There's a few examples of that. So the list kind of just keeps going on like that. But with that diversity of application in mind, I want to talk to you again about the Rainy Day Sun. So there's this piece in one of the old issues of the Rainy Day Sun where the author talks about walking down the street and imagining having a cooperative business of some kind or another on every corner of the street. It was a dream of a community that was built on democratic engagement and equitable ownership. Now, obviously that dream didn't come to be. Cooperative businesses, as strong as they can be, can still fail. Banks don't usually like lending money to dirty hippies. But most importantly, cooperatives are notoriously bad about getting the word out, hence the fact that there's so many people who are members of them without even realizing it. But we have a second chance. The United Nations declared 2012 to be the International Year of Cooperatives, and they liked it so much that they went and made the first Saturday in July the Day of Cooperatives, which seems like pretty good timing, right? Democratically run businesses that are owned by the workers who just built the whole thing by pulling on their bootstraps and starting from the ground up. Seems like a pretty good thing to be thinking about on the 4th, right? So, if I've done my job right, you're probably sitting at the edge of your seat asking how? How can I get involved? What can I do to help? So, I'll start at the beginning. You could join a co-op. Credit union is an easy one. Or you could start a co-op. If you don't have time for that, you could help a co-op financially, either being an investor, like a Class B investor, or just attending and promoting a fundraiser that they're having. Just $5 to show up to the party, it's fine. But no matter what you do, there are a slew of different ways that you can get involved and help bolster the movement in Buffalo and across the world. You could learn more about the movement, the model. You could help organize a workshop, maybe help organize another conference in Buffalo on cooperatives. If you have a friend who's selling their business, maybe you could talk to them about possibly selling it to their workers as a cooperative business. But no matter what you do, please, 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 just talk about co-ops to anyone and everyone, to your family, to your friends, to your neighbors, to your students, to your teachers, to your politicians, to Facebook, Twitter, make a hashtag or something, co-op everything sounds good. I've actually got a pamphlet full of resources on the back tables. It's got the little Twin Pines logo on it. If anybody wants to learn more, it's got books, websites, stuff you can check out. But I want to leave you with this really solid quote from W.E.B. Du Bois, well known as an African-American writer and civil rights activist with a, you guessed it, little-known passion for cooperatives of every kind. We have an opportunity here to teach industrial and cultural democracy to a world that bitterly needs it. Thank you.